Welcome to Digitally Creative. I'm your host, Vincent Ferrari, and this week I have someone who's a little different, but I think based on what we've talked about in the last couple of episodes, it's going to be a good fit, and someone that's going to give you a little bit of information on something that everyone and their brother is talking about. I have Josh Tyson. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Oh, hello. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Usually when I have people on, I usually let them introduce themselves because I'm really bad at thinking of all the important parts that they like to hit when they introduce themselves. So instead of introducing you as an AI expert, which is pretty much how I would introduce you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how what we're kind of give us an idea of what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Josh Tyson. I'm currently the director of creative content at OneReach.ai. I kind of came to that world through the time I spent as managing editor of UX Magazine about 10 years ago. I would say the through line kind of through all my professional experiences has just been, I guess if I boiled it down, like a desire to create and to be creative.
Hmm.
For me, that's primarily been writing. Working as a writer in different capacities for 25 years. And so I think one of the great things about being a writer and writing both not like fiction and nonfiction is that you are always learning. You're always, or at least
Hmm.
if you're pushing yourself, you are. So I've always been eager to kind of take on roles where I maybe don't know as much as the people around me, just so I can learn. But yeah, I think my experience with UX Magazine dovetailed really nicely as I kind of came back into the technology fold
Hmm.
with some of the same people because, um, experience design is kind of all about making products more seamless. And
Hmm.
as you get into AI and particularly conversational AI, that's a very low friction interface. If you can just talk to a machine, I mean, we've seen it, right? People are loving just interacting with ChatGPT by typing messages, and it's
Hmm.
kind of, I mean, it's unleashed a lot of things, but I think one of the things that maybe doesn't get talked about quite enough is how well it works as an interface and how
Yeah.
natural it is for people to just kind of have conversations with machines. I mean, currently, ChatGPT is just kind of a prediction machine. It's not. It's a front end looking for a back end. But once you take something like ChatGPT and connect it to a backend where a lot of different technologies are being sequenced together, then you can ask it to do more sophisticated things than, help me write an email.
Sure.
So,
Along those lines, it's been really interesting to see what Microsoft did with integrating ChatGPT into Bing
mhm.
and particularly Microsoft Edge, because one day I just turned on Microsoft Edge, which is my browser of choice since they integrated Chromium, and there's a big blue Bing button at the top. Now, when you click it, you have a GPT powered front end to Bing sitting in your browser that can write emails, that can write blog posts, that can pretty much do everything. And when you're looking for data, the idea that you could say, "Hey, can you find me data on this?" And it goes, "Yeah, sure. Here's the data." And it also gives you, what I like about it is actually gives you supporting links right underneath. And then if you want more specifics, you could tell it, "Can you elaborate on this?" Rather than having to dig in and scroll through. It's like, no, I can just get to the bottom of what I'm looking for very, very quickly. A couple of well-constructed sentences can replace tons and tons of digging and reading and search. It's mind-blowing as an application because I think initially we heard that Google and all of them were gonna be very scared of it, and I was like, "I don't know, are they gonna be scared of something to go to a window and type something in?" But then you see the way this works and you go, "Oh, oh,
Yeah.
now I get it."
Yeah. I don't think anyone was necessarily expecting to be talking about Bing again.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, too bad Ask Jeeves has kind of phased out because this could really be their moment. But
Well, they actually, I mean, if you think about the original Ask Jeeves was the idea, right? It's kind of
yeah.
funny. You go back all those years and it's like it wanted everything in the form of a question, and then now everybody, it's becoming more and more natural to ask your oracle, whatever it ends up being, a question. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's such a natural way to interact with, a data set as opposed to knowing, if I put this in quotes, it's going to give me this specific thing. And if I put it in, with a comma, then it's searching for these two separate things exclusive of each other. And you don't need to know that kind of context anymore. Now it's like, how would a human being ask another human being this question? And that's how they get the answer.
Yeah, it really does drop a lot of barriers. And I
Mhm,
think it's interesting to me too, because when I was working on the book that I co-authored, we were thinking, I think, or at least I was picturing in my mind that a lot of these applications or these use cases would come out of big companies, right? Like there'd be some big company that would release some sort of AI enabled product or experience that would really blow people's minds.
mhm.
And one of the things that we encountered as we were writing the book too was like it was hard to point to examples because there are really only a handful of companies, even still, that are leveraging conversational AI in truly novel ways. And so it's interesting to me that now what's happening is you're seeing it become more democratized in a way. I mean, I think OpenAI is set to release some plugins for ChatGPT that can do things like you can feed it your to-do list and it can start automating those tasks for you, which is
That's
really,
wild.
yeah, I mean, and those are like some of the kind of experiences that we spend time in the book talking about that, again, I kind of figured businesses might be the first to unleash those on the world. But we're kind of seeing a scenario where people are getting to pick and choose these tools and customize them and play with them. And then that's sort of what set off this revolution, for
Yeah,
better or for
even
worse.
I think it's Notion now has this whole AI backend that they're building, and Notion is a incredibly powerful app to begin with for planning and organizing and working with teams and project organization. And now it will do all of that. Plus, you don't have to do the tap dance with other people, for example, when you want to set up a meeting anymore. It'll go, okay, I see what you have going on. I see what you have. And it'll take 3 or 4 people and it'll go, all right, here's everyone's availability. This is the optimal meeting time for all of you. Do you want to set this as the meeting for everybody on the team? And it's like just those little annoyances. Everybody that does any kind of clerical stuff at some point has probably had the thought, oh man, I wish I had an assistant that could do this for me. And now it's getting to a point where you kind of do.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I read an article a few months ago, maybe it was in Wired, that was saying that like we were entering the era of an intern for everybody,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
sort of how it feels. I mean, there's really nothing preventing me from kind of creating my own large language model and training it. I mean, I have clips of writing dating back, 20 years, things that I could scan out of old newspapers,
Hmm.
and I could train it on my entire catalog of writing and use it as not to necessarily write things for me, but if I want to ask it, hey, how many different times have I written about this particular artist, or this movie, or this piece of technology, and it could help me summarize my own work. I mean, even something
Yeah.
like that would be incredibly useful. So,
And what's kind of interesting about it, and I did not know this, but Joe Rogan regularly there's a guy, you probably know him. His name is Lex Friedman, and
oh yeah,
he's very involved in the AI space. And he had him on, and they were talking about, they were talking more so about Chat GPT than anything else, because that's kind of the one that everyone's paying attention to. People like me, I'm excited about like Leonardo and Mid Journey. Like those are the ones that really have my attention at the moment. Everyone else and their brother is talking about Chat GPT, and I understand why, but he was talking about the mechanics of how it works. And I don't think people fully understand, because when people think AI, they think neural networks, they think of high powered supercomputers, they think of computers that think like a person. And what he was explaining was that the AI behind ChatGPT is more of a predictive language model than anything else. Like it kind of understands language and understands questions, and it knows based on a lot of training and a large data set. When you say these things, this is the information you're looking for, more than it's actually quote thinking the way we look at traditional thinking. And I think that was the most mind blowing thing to me. It's like, wow, so it's not really you have to kind of reframe your definition of what artificial intelligence is. So I think it would probably be a good idea, before we go much further into the conversation, to actually understand a simple question that no one's asking, because everybody just kind of figures they know how it works. What actually is artificial intelligence? and,
um,
and and keep that as like a 15-second answer, Josh. 15 seconds to what is the artificial intelligence.
oh,
I'm
great, that's
kidding.
all I need. Well, I think artificial intelligence as a term is a bit problematic because
Hmm.
um, I feel like there's a lot of determining factors that you could think about. Like if we're thinking about creating or building with AI in an entertainment setting, then it's easy to imagine scenarios where you'd want it to exhibit human-like qualities, or even if there's an element of an AI, maybe in some sort of caregiver scenario, where you'd want it to exhibit human-like traits to earn someone's trust. But then when you look at more like productivity models, um, you kind of want these machines to be functioning as machines, more like
Hmm.
machines than people, because machines are incredibly good at running process automations flawlessly a million times, whereas people will eventually mess it up, which is
Right.
why I think that's the core reason why humans can't beat AI at chess anymore. Chess is a game of patterns, and a human's going to make a mistake eventually.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it gets a little muddy as to like what artificial intelligence is or could be, and then you have the whole notion of artificial general intelligence, which I think is more the notion of like a thinking machine
Hmm.
that can kind of function at a human level. But yeah, it kind of depends on what you want out of artificial intelligence, or what you're trying to build with it. Like how you might think of what it actually is.
Hmm.
But I think in productivity settings, it's interesting to me because you really do want them to be functioning like machines. And if you create the right scenarios, you have people helping these machines be better machines by improving the processes that they're automating and continuing to make evolutions there and to fine tune. And by virtue of those machines, then alleviating them of some of the tedious, busy work that makes up a lot of our waking life, then you're allowing people more time to do what they're good at, which is creative problem solving. So it sort of alleviates a lot of the tedium and opens up more time for people to be creative. So I think in that ideal scenario, AI becomes an ally and far less of a threat. Um, but I still don't know if I can give you a 15-second definition of what it is, as I've just proven.
Well, I think what's making these modern advancements so interesting is that the actual processing, the machine part of it isn't doesn't feel as mechanical as it used to. I think that the
Yeah.
thing that's happening now is that natural language interfaces are not as clunky as they used to be, and computers are, I think it's probably a factor of computers just being so much more powerful than they were maybe 20 years ago. So computers can process natural language a lot more naturally almost than they used to be able to. So what you're ending up with is this crazy data subset and this super sophisticated algorithm that can come up with what you want it to, that has on top of it a layer of almost humanity where your interface is your natural language. It's the way you speak to another person, it's the way a human being thinks, and it's just really good at translating that between, your brain and its brain, and giving you an answer in a way you'll appreciate the information in.
Yeah, it's wild how disarming it can be. We have sort of a pilot uh, app, or I don't know what you'd really call it, this thing that we've built at OneReach that allows you to talk to any celebrity or historical figure. Um,
Wow.
and I've been in conversations with, I mean, it kind of defaults to Einstein. And I can
Mhm,
remember clearly a day where I was sitting there just posing questions to Einstein, trying to get interesting results and also trying to see if I could break it.
mhm.
And it really, I mean, I knew what I was interacting with. I was fully aware of what it was. And within like 5 or 6 interactions, I was having moments where I'd lapse and I'd feel like I was talking to a person, and I'd realize I was asking Einstein, for like philosophical input on how I should maybe be living my life, like, without
Wow.
even really realizing it. It just started to feel like I was having a conversation with a human, and I kept having to sort of reset my mind around that. And so it totally makes sense that people have these interactions with ChatGPT and mistake them for human like interactions. But it shouldn't. I think it's important for people to know that ChatGPT is not thinking; it's just predicting extraordinarily well.
Extraordinarily well, yeah, and
Hmm.
and for anyone that hasn't, played with these AIs that we're playing with, all the popular ones, Midjourney and ChatGPT, they're releasing every couple of months. They're releasing major revisions to their code that do even more. Um, I I'm very fortunate that I'm a paying subscriber to Midjourney, just because I
Hmm.
thought it was so much fun to use. And I was like, this is going to be useful, even if it's not 100% useful right now. It's going to be useful just to understand this. And I kind of zoomed in on it. And when they released version 5 and you see the difference in how much it leapt, in version 4 just came out in like December. We're not even talking like we're not even talking about years of development between revisions anymore. We're talking months of revisions. And it's like, wow. And it's just like I think Lex Friedman was saying that he said when you see the evolution, to Chat GPT V5 and Midjourney V5, just understand that they're already building out the framework for version 10 of these things. And when you see what version 5 does, it's going to blow you away. And so far it has delivered everything it said it was. And it's just I don't know, I feel like this is an exciting time to be in the space in some form because like it's happening right in front of us quickly.
Yeah, it is very exciting, and I can certainly see why a lot of people find it alarming and scary. I mean,
Mhm.
I do it at times myself, but I guess to me, it feels like at this point you can't run from AI.
It's
I know
coming.
there's yeah, there's been a push recently to kind of put a pause on
Mhm.
development,
Mhm.
um, which I don't necessarily think is a horrible idea, but I don't think it's feasible.
It's
And
like, what's it gonna do? I mean, if
yeah,
the AI is gonna scale. That's just the way it's supposed to. If it's scaling, it's working.
yeah, and I
So
mean, I think even if they stop working on developments and building better models, as long as those
mhm.
old other models or existing models are still out there, people are going to continue to push the limits of what they can do with them. So it's
Yeah,
um, yeah, it's a precarious situation, but I think um, as a creative person myself, there are aspects of GPT that are somewhat threatening and frightening, but
absolutely.
I think the bigger potential there is for me to use it as a tool.
Well, we were talking before we started. And I was telling, for those of you that don't know, obviously I'm technically unemployed, but as my girlfriend says, I'm the busiest unemployed man on the planet. But I've been consulting on a patent. And without going too far into what the patent is for, the application is very relevant to what we're talking about. My co-author and I were working on the introduction paragraph, which is always the hardest thing to do, especially when you're writing a patent, because you have about 2 paragraphs to say this is what the item is, this is what it does, this is why we need a patent, this is why this is relevant, this is why it's unique, and you have to cram that all into a few hundred words. Like you don't have a lot of wiggle room. So her and I were on the phone chatting, and she's like, I don't know what we're going to say here. And I'm like, and we were bashing around some sentences. I said, well, I have an idea. If you want to play guinea pig for a minute. And she goes, yeah, sure. I go into Chat GPT and I kind of gave it the parameters of what we were developing. And I said, I need 2 paragraphs as a patent intro. I literally said on a patent application for this product. And it gave me two, I won't say perfect. It wasn't perfect, but it was such a good foundation for what we wanted to accomplish with the patent application. And now we were sitting there with something that needed editing rather than having us come up with it. And for the first time since all the AI stuff started really hitting the mainstream to where, normies, so to speak, were playing around with it, it was the first time where I felt like, oh, now I know why people are scared for their jobs. Like, because if your job is to write patent applications, it's like, wow, I just took a major chunk of that off the table. Like that initial, like, help me write the initial phase of it. Well, you know, if as long as I'm a halfway decent editor and writer, I can pretty much correct what the computer spits out and make that usable. And that's going to be good enough for what I need. So,
yeah, that's certainly true, and it's probably a safe bet that GPT, in its when it was devouring the internet, probably read a fair number of patent applications,
yeah.
which gives it a leg up as well. I mean, I for an article recently about whether or not people should use ChatGPT to write their resumes, we were
Hmm.
screwing around and just feeding it prompts, and I was shocked by just giving it a few sentences kind of summarizing some of my professional highlights. It quickly kicked out a very thorough, somewhat hyperbolic resume, but in terms of a starting point, I would much
Sure.
rather it'd be much easier to start with that than to write it from scratch because
Yeah.
it even like put placeholder dates in. I mean, all I really had to do was go through and clean it up, and then rethink some of the areas where it may have made assumptions about some of my experiences. But to your point, yeah, to be able to start, I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now is that GPT and other generative AI are making that starting point for a lot of projects. Your first draft is a lot less rough,
Mhm.
and that certainly does pose a problem for people, who work entry level copywriting jobs,
Yeah. Yeah.
coding, things like that. But I think I think there's going to be a huge demand for people who know how to work with AI. And the barrier to working with AI has become a lot lower. I mean, we've been talking a bit at OneReach.ai about how how GPT-4
Mhm.
has kind of obliterated. I, I guess traditional isn't the right word because it hasn't been around long enough. But like older methods of training, like an NLU model, you had to kind of start from scratch. But with GPT-4 now, you can just you can give it conversational prompts and train it.
Mhm.
You can personalize it in a much more efficient way. And so, yeah, every aspect of designing things and creating experiences has shifted, but it's also there's a lot of opportunity to get your hands dirty and get comfortable with AI and maybe try to position yourself, based on your skill set as someone who can work with AI
Yeah.
for another company or help in some way. And I
I
think there will be a big need for people who are comfortable working with AI.
I feel like that's an interesting way to, you know, kind of juxtapose that to what people have been learning about computers for years, right? It's like, oh, accountants are we're not going to need accountants anymore because Excel. It's like,
Hmm.
well, okay, but every accountant I know actually uses Excel, right? But now you can't be an accountant if you don't know how to use Excel. Like
Yeah.
it's a requirement, right? It's part of the job. I was just as an experiment, I told Chat GPT I had an idea for a radio show. And I was like, here's the idea for the radio show. Give me a 3 paragraph pitch for this. That was it. It came up with the pitch. It came up with examples of songs I would use on the show. It came up with a name for the show. And it came up with a tagline for the show, all unprompted. And I was just like, I know it's hard. It's hard to, there's a way, everybody's playing with it right now, right? So all the examples are these incredible, like, whoa, examples. But just on the mundanity of day-to-day stuff, it's killing it. It's killing it. And that's like we're at the cusp of where it's going to start seeing mainstream adoption. You can only start thinking like, what is your accountant going to do when they feed it 500 receipt lines and it sorts it and gives you the general ledger entries for all that? What can your accountant now do for you when they're not tied down doing boring stuff that all this time had to be done manually? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel that far off anymore.
No, and it's not hard to imagine an accountant, a headstrong accountant,
Hmm.
finding ways to use AI to streamline their own processes and scale their business,
I, I,
or decide to provide more um, human level interaction around
sure.
their services.
Do you think that's where the pivot is going to happen, where it's not going to be so much, you know, it's going to be more of a who's using AI to enhance their business or who's using it to enhance their creativity versus who's avoiding it? Like, do you think, like, I'm sure, which, because right now, because this is the main reason I wanted to have you on today, because in the maker, artist, creativity community, which is what this show mainly focuses on, there are people that are utterly terrified of AI.
Yeah.
And to an extent, I'm not going to lie, to an extent, I understand. I'm not even going to dismiss their concerns. There are concerns, but at the same time, I feel like it's the same thing when makers and woodworkers started adopting CNCs and lasers.
Hmm.
You kind of had to, right? You if you want to woodwork at scale in a fashion that moves with and you want to have a business where that happens, you can't do it without a CNC at some point. Cutting out repetition, doing repetition, 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 right? I'm starting to wonder, like, where is the AI going to fit into creative outlets, and is it going to render some people's creative outlet obsolete, or or artists that are getting paid, is Midjourney going to take away their job? I'd love to just say no, that's ridiculous, but I could see probably a tier where lower rung, less talented artists or smaller artists who are, taking occasional commission work where I can just go to Midjourney and say I want this and get that and be like, "Ah, perfect, good enough." Where people start accepting good enough as opposed to exactly what I want. I was wondering what
Yeah.
you thought about, the impact of what we're seeing and how it's evolving on the creative community.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I think, uh, it mirrors the situation a lot of, like, businesses and enterprise companies are in that the businesses that embrace AI and start working with it now and start I mean, a lot of that is involves failure, like trying things out, seeing what doesn't work, and iterating like mad. Those are the businesses that are gonna be around in another 5 years. The companies that are kicking the can or waiting to see what their competitors do are probably not gonna make it, because I
Mhm,
think, as you've mentioned, like, just how quickly all this technology is developing, I think you can expect changes to the business landscape to take place rather rapidly as well. So I think for artists, it's a similar predicament. I mean, I
mhm,
think in the example you mentioned, someone who a visual artist who decides to run away from Midjourney or generative AI or forsake it entirely, or that they're probably going to be in a tougher position than an artist who figures out ways to integrate it into the services they provide.
mhm.
Um, but it's also no secret that being an artist has always been incredibly difficult. I mean, I've been writing for 25 years. I think, you know, the early part of my career when I was focusing a lot on just writing magazine articles and film criticism and art criticism and working on fiction and stuff like that, like I always had to have some sort of side hustle.
Mhm.
I worked as a valet for a while. I was driving a bus for a senior citizens center. But then ultimately those jobs ended up becoming things that I wrote about and got
Sure.
articles published on. So for me, it's like there's always been this balance of trying to fulfill myself creatively while also making enough money, you know, to contribute
Sure.
to my
Sure.
to what's happening with my family life. So I don't know that struggle is going to go away.
Mhm.
My hope is well, I see that AI has been democratized enough in this sort of weird flash moment that there's a lot of opportunity for artists and creatives to seize AI and really use it as a tool to propel themselves forward. And I don't think that that's a guaranteed recipe for success, but I think the people that do take that approach put themselves in a more advantageous position. But I also think that, right now we're all very excited by the things that like Midjourney and Dolly and Stable Diffusion can cook up.
Mhm.
Um, but there probably will reach kind of a saturation point where people are like, okay, yeah, I've seen that 100 times already. Oh, the Pope
Sure.
wearing a coat, clever. And I
Well.
think we might get back to a point where, I mean, I could see a pendulum swing where people all of a sudden are intensely more interested in things that humans create. I think about my oldest son. He's in high school, but he is. I would say he might not agree, but he is a professional level jazz musician. He
Mhm.
plays vibraphone. And he knows that AI can play jazz and can play a jazz solo, but would anyone really want to watch that in a live setting? Maybe once but I don't know that there's an enduring audience for that. But I think people, I mean, I'm biased. Every time I watch him, I get a little choked up because it's just incredible.
Of course.
But there's something amazing about watching humans push their limits and break new ground creatively. And I don't think our interest in that is going to wane. I think if anything, it might intensify
Mhm.
as we kind of get inundated with more and more AI. Right now we're seeing a lot of like people just kind of screwing around with it,
Sure.
but there could come a moment where we're flooded with it all the time.
Well,
Kind of the way like our, inboxes are flooded with junk mail or our social media feeds are just clogged up with stuff we didn't ask
ads.
for. Yeah.
It's I do think, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and like I said, you coming on the show the timing is perfect because this is all I've been thinking about for the last couple of months. Like I've just been fascinated by this, and I think one of the things that's been so fascinating about it is I remember when this stuff started appearing, and it was like late last year when it
Hmm.
not that it never appeared, right? But when it really started to like trickle into the mainstream, like, hey, there's this technology out there that's pretty cool. And I remember it being really easy to dismiss. And people could just look at it and go, oh, that's like 50 years off. And then version 2 comes out and it's like, "Oh." And then version 3 comes out, it's like, "Uh-oh." And then version 4 hits and it's like, "Okay, we really do have to start looking at this now. This is not taking 50 years." And do you think that I mean, I've been thinking personally, and I'd love your opinion on this. I think that part of the reason people are so scared is how quickly it's moving. Like this isn't taking 30 years to move version to version anymore. This is like, whoa, this went from a neat novelty to, huh, this could put me out of a job in a period of about 8 months.
For
It's like,
sure.
that's kind of crazy, and I wonder if that's what it is, because it's like, if it's evolving that quickly, where are we gonna be at the end of this year? Like, it's exciting. It's terrifying, I'm sure, but it's also exciting to think, like, where are we gonna be at the end of the year with this kind of technology?
Yeah, yeah, that is kind of exciting. I would say this the speed with which it's kind of um, its visibility has
Mhm,
skyrocketed. I think that is. I mean, there's a lot of factors making people feel fearful. I think the speed with its well, it's kind of its sudden arrival, how quickly
mhm,
it's evolved, and then seeing all these potential outcomes in terms of like how this might take away my job.
right,
That's a powerful combination for
sure,
creating disease.
yeah,
Um, but again, I think it's not really something we can run from at this point. And I think the best option for creatives is to really try and find ways to use it as a tool.
mhm,
I kind of with my own kids, they don't really use social media much, but to me, like that's a good example because I think that is an instance where technology is actually you become the tool. Technology
mhm,
is using you. Um, but I think with AI, we have a rare opportunity to really take control a bit and
sure.
dictate the trajectory somewhat, and be sure that we're not being used as tools, especially with technology that's quite a bit more powerful than social media algorithms.
And significantly more dangerous. I mean, if you're
Absolutely.
just strictly on the negative side of it, this is dangerous technology. Like, if you think about, you have people in, call centers in Mumbai and, all these places, and they're doing, these incredibly large financial scam operations. And one of the things, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. One of the things that tips people off is when you get a random call from a person with an Indian accent, you're likely to just go, huh, this is not a real thing. But what if the thing calling you sounds just like, Tom from the Midwest? And when he says his name is Tom, it actually sounds like his name might actually be Tom. And he might
Hmm.
actually be in Missouri. And he might actually be calling from Symantec trying to get money from a subscription or get you your money back from a subscription. It starts to make you wonder, like, "Oh, and what if that can also interact with you like a person?" Like, "Oh, yeah, now it starts to get really scary, because I know that there are people who are scared of the potential misuse of it. I mean, we've been hearing about deep fakes now for they're getting more convincing, but they're still not really convincing. They're just very good. They're
Hmm.
getting better, but we've been hearing about that forever. And I wonder, if all the increased attention on AI is also going to accelerate the development of like deepfake type technology. Is that going to
Yeah,
be a thing?
probably, unfortunately. And I think even before ChatGPT was unleashed over the past, 5 years, maybe even going further back, we can see through social media, especially people kind of living in these bubbles
Yeah,
of information where they're just kind of fed information that perpetuates their own worldview and
sure.
how destructive that can be or how problematic. I mean, it's done damage to political systems, it's done damage to families, individuals, and that was kind of before ChatGPT was in the picture, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the potential for bad behavior um, has certainly increased. And like you said, deep fakes, you can still kind of spot them now, but
Now, yeah.
there's no reason to expect that that will always be the case.
Somebody said we're going to hit a point where you're not only not going to be able to believe everything you read, you're not going to be able to believe everything you see anymore.
Or
Like,
here, yeah.
or yeah, like that. Just think about that for a second. Like, oh, at least we have video. We can watch video of a guy saying a thing. It's like, yeah, now you can watch Tom Cruise talking about how he's married to an alien. And it's like
Yeah.
it's not that far off.
Yeah, and we're already in a world where there's not really a shared version of reality,
Hmm.
by and large, and so, yeah, that is very perilous.
That's a definite concern too. Like, like now when the information, if, you have an AI where you can plug in the sources you like, right? And now when you ask it something, the answers are all going to be tailored from how it learned from those sources. Like, oh, I'm always going to get answers I like to read. Like, I'm never going to hear another thing that I didn't want to hear again, which I
Yeah,
guess is
and
okay to some people, but some people probably need to hear some other opinions once in a while.
yeah, it's good to be challenged, and I think
Mhm,
a healthy mind is an open mind, and yeah, this is problematic in a lot of ways, but, I mean, again, like, our best hope is that more people are aware and involved and
mhm,
engaged with AI
and
and
not running
engaged in
from it.
conversations about it. Yeah, because I mean, I've talked to people who say this window is already closed, but it definitely seems like a window is closing in terms of
It's closing.
set, yeah, setting
Yeah,
a tenable trajectory for our future and our relationship with technology.
mhm,
And that moment is now really. To me, it's encouraging in a way that people are finding ways to use things like ChatGPT just to improve their personal lives or to move their projects along faster, to give themselves more agency.
mhm,
It gives opportunities. There are a lot of people who have really good ideas, but maybe don't feel comfortable communicating them verbally or with writing.
sure.
And now they have the ability to synthesize that and to take part in conversations. So I think there's that side of it too. That I'm not saying that side would in any way drown out the dangers or necessarily stop bad actors from using this technology, but it certainly is better to be aware of what the technology is capable of and what you're interacting with. And I mean, responsible designs. I mean, companies using AI, I think, probably know this, but it would be very irresponsible to trick a customer into thinking they were talking to a human when they're dealing with a digital agent. And I
Right.
think responsible use cases, it's made clear upfront to the user, like, hey, I'm an intelligent digital worker. I'm here to help you with this. These are the things I can do really well, but if you want to do these things, I might need to connect you with a human agent.
Well, we've seen those in the in fact, looking at Zencaster right now as we're recording, there's one of those little bubbles in the lower right corner, and I know that that bubble's not connecting me to a person when I first click it. I know
Yeah.
that bubble is gonna be a bot of some kind that's gonna sit there and wait for me to hit a keyword that it doesn't know, and then it's gonna be like, "Okay, hold for a moment, let me get an associate for you," which is I'm okay with that if it works. I think the
Yeah.
thing that, the most frustrating thing for IVRs for most people is they don't work, because it's like, I had to design an IVR for the company I worked for prior.
Uh huh.
And, we had it set up. And one of the things I said is like, what do you want the zero button to do? And the guy goes, nothing. Well, you can't do that. It's like, you're damn right I can do that. And that's what we're going to do. I don't want people to hit zero and just bypass everything and talk to somebody. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, there are people actively making the decision to make the zero button go nowhere. And all I'm thinking is how many people angrily start slamming on the zero button as soon as they make a call and get an IVR, or start yelling representative. And it's like, yeah, guess what, dude? That probably won't do anything anymore. So,
Yeah, my co-author on Age of Invisible Machines, Rob Wilson, he's the CEO and co-founder of OneReach.ai, and
mhm.
he's also an experienced design pioneer. I mean, he's been working in UX for decades, and he's been working with conversational AI for 20 years, I think at least. And what drew him to it as an experienced designer was what you're describing. Like IVRs are typically some of the worst experiences people have with technology.
Horrible. They're horrible. They're
Yeah,
just in general, they're just horrible for the most
they
part.
are. They are. And he's pointed out to me that, some of the technologies associated with IVRs haven't been updated since the 70s.
Hmm.
And so there's like this weird trade-off there where companies kind of know that they're delivering a subpar experience that's going to irritate their customer bases, but clearly it saves them enough money in one way or another that they're willing to make that sacrifice.
Right.
And as consumers, we're just accustomed to the fact that, oh, I know when I call this call center, it's going to totally irritate me and it's going to take twice as long as I want to spend doing this, but here we go. But so we actually recently did some user testing on a solution. One of our competitors released it was like a phone uh, model where you could call in and try and schedule an appointment.
Mhm.
And so we created a similar one using GPT, which we've been using for years, actually, on our platform. But the uh, the the conversion, or I'm sorry, the completion percentage. The Why am I spacing on the term? But the
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 number of
containment
people
rate,
who
the
come
containment
in.
rate,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
the containment rate for the competitors' experience was 80%, which is
Pretty
really really
good.
high. It's
That's
very
pretty
good.
good.
And so we were able to get 98% containment rate with the solution that we built, which was exciting as well. But what really was impressive to us was, I think the net promoter score for our competitor was maybe 4, which
Okay.
I think was slightly below the industry average, which was like a 5 or a 50. And so we were able to get, I think, an 80, if I'm not mistaken, an 8 or an 80.
Wow.
And that was because we had spent so much time fine tuning the experience and making sure that it could handle curveballs and like the weird things that people say, the way they phrase requests when they're trying to
That's the
schedule an
trick.
appointment.
That's the
Yeah.
trick, and that's it right there, because everyone can develop a system that can accommodate the masses. When you
Hmm.
start to get out to edge cases, where somebody is like, they want to schedule a second appointment, like, can your system handle that? Or is it just going to dump them back to the menu where they're going to
Hmm.
have to reestablish who they are, then dig back through the system to get back to set up a second appointment, and there are a lot of
Yeah.
systems that are just, I mean, I have a Microsoft Surface laptop studio. It's a $2,400 laptop. It took me 4 days of navigating their IVR before I finally just decided I would get in touch with one of my corporate contacts, even though it wasn't and be like, can you just give me anyone that I can talk to? I'll handle it once I get somebody, but I can't get anyone on the phone because I was
Hmm.
an edge case,
Yeah.
because the software to do the troubleshooting wasn't working on my laptop, and therefore I couldn't go any further. Like, the system didn't know what to do when I couldn't give it a code from the software to tell the system what the problem was, so it knew who to transfer me to. So it just kept dumping me out of the system. Like,
Yeah.
that's
I
a,
mean,
it's a terrible system.
well, it's similar to what you just described with like, no, we're not going to let them hit zero. I mean,
Yeah.
I was trying to reach our internet provider because I was having problems with our internet, and all it would let me do was kind of check the modem and restart it, and there was really no way to get past that loop. I
You
kept
unplug it
trying and
and
I
plug it
couldn't.
back in.
Yeah, and like literally, I could not figure out how to get to an actual representative. It took me like a couple days of screwing around. But that is kind of the baseline experience that people are accustomed to having with IVRs and customer service centers. But I think like the user testing I was just describing, once
Mhm.
all it takes is a couple of companies providing that level of automated service
Sure.
to change the whole landscape. And it doesn't even have to be in every industry, right? Like if people see that they can call this company and this is so much better than anyone else, like that puts a lot of pressure. I don't think there's really been enough pressure on
There's been none.
companies to improve that experience because there's like kind of that weird unspoken agreement that companies know they are bad experiences and customers are used to dealing with them. So we'll just.
If we all suck at this, no one's better. Everybody's on an equal playing field, so it just never changes. One of the
Exactly.
things I noticed, because as I was doing the research for this episode, I was looking through the OneReach website. One of the screenshots that caught my eye. I have run 3 different IVRs in my life,
Mm,
and you have a screenshot on one of them, and I was like, man, that would have been so useful. It shows the entrance point, and then it tracks the customer path
yeah.
through the IVR, and then on the side it gives you analytics to how many people took this path, how many people took this path, how many people took this path. And it made me wonder, like, how many times your interaction with these systems would have been better had somebody just looked at the way people are using the system and taking those options that are 7 menu items deep and moved them to the top. Just doing that one thing would make some of these systems so much more useful. Instead of having, press one for English, two for Spanish. Okay, fine, good. Now we have two options. If you have this question or this question, well, what if option three was the third most used option instead of burying me through all the menus? And I was looking at that screen. I'm like, that's such a simple thing to look at, but I've never seen that in the IVR systems that I've run. And I'm like, I wanted that. I was like, I would love to see that data. So,
Yeah, I think what you're describing is actually our platform. Like
mhm,
that's how people build experiences on our platform. It's like a no code, low code platform. So it's
yes.
almost like similar maybe to how you'd build a website in Squarespace or something. You can
Hmm.
like kind of drag and drop steps in and then crack them open. And if you want to adjust the code, you can because you can see it. But you
Hmm.
can really create software without writing code, which is a pretty huge improvement
Absolutely.
over what exists. And it also, you know, you were talking about maybe the quality of experiences. One of the things we advocate for and that we do in practice is we involve when we're working with a customer, we're going to involve people in creating the automations that will make their jobs easier because
Hmm.
they're the ones who best understand the processes
Sure.
that are often being automated. And that kind of points to another thing that we usually advise, which is there's kind of this rush, I think, to throw this stuff out to the customers, right? Let's wow our customers with these amazing experiences, but this stuff is all so complex, and depending on the shape of your organization, it's going to be very unique. And so, really, the only way to make progress is to fail, like is to
A
prop
lot.
something up. Yes, exactly. Um, but like kind of with this no code, low code building approach, you can do that within a day. You can prop up an experience and test it through. You could probably run like 4 or 5 rounds of iteration,
It's
and
amazing. You're
and that
actually
might be a
talking
light day.
about you're talking about something that makers take for granted because we're all about rapid prototyping and iterative design. And so this is our life. Like 3D
Hmm.
printers exist because we love rapid prototyping. Iterative design is why you can do basic, stress testing and material testing in something like Fusion 360, where you can look and see how a material is going to operate before you ever commit it to actually being something made out of a physical material. And it's
Hmm.
funny to hear it like in your industry, which is more development and software and user experience, hearing the same concepts. Like, yeah, no, we could put this out there and see how people handle it when they bang on it for a little while, and then we can adjust it and bring it back and make it more useful until we get the refined level that we're looking for. I
Yeah, and
love it.
we usually advocate too for like doing that internally first. There
Mhm.
are so many benefits to building automations for your employees
Mhm.
first. They tend to be a little more forgiving. Like if your AI accidentally says all your inventory is free today, customers are going to hold you to it. Employees are going to roll with the
Like,
punch. You know.
"Hey, there's something wrong with the computer today, guys."
Yeah, and I think you're going to get more honest user feedback too
Sure.
from your employees. So it really is advantageous to start building internally, and then you have this side effect of your workforce becoming comfortable using AI, and
Sure.
hopefully, if you're doing it right, it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like, oh, this is going to make my job easier. I
Right.
see ways now that I can design automations for all these different things, and now I'll have more time to focus on higher level problem solving, or it starts to get into this area where like productivity
Mhm.
as the metric for success starts to waver too, right? Like
Sure, sure.
if we can automate all the tedious things and then those tedious things become more and more sophisticated, in some ways, yes, there's less for us to do, but maybe that's only a bad thing if we believe to our cores that we need to be spending 40 hours each week
Exactly.
working just for the sake of working. So, you know, and to kind of bring that back to creatives, if we're and this is a leap because have to kind of envision a society where productivity isn't the grail, right? Like
Mhm.
we're more concerned with the quality of the things that we're creating and the quality of the experiences we're having and hopefully the quality of the interactions we're having with other people because we're not as burdened. I mean, technology has done great things for humanity over the centuries or whatever how far back you want to trace it, but it comes at a cost because all the technology that we're working with right now that that we're trying to help companies automate like all their legacy systems behind the scenes and connect them. Like those pieces of technology have continued to create more work for people. AI will lessen the workload significantly, but it will also there'll be a lot of opportunity to contribute
Sure.
to the way that you're working or interacting with AI. So
As they said years ago, when all these when all these factories started making everything from human assembled to robot assembled, somebody, a bunch of people wisely said, like, yeah, but somebody's got to service the robots. The robots aren't going to run indefinitely. So yeah, your job may not be building cars, it might be building the robots that build the cars.
yeah,
That might be your job. You're not going to be a mechanic that's fixing cars on the assembly line. You're going to be a mechanic that's repairing the hydraulics on the arm that puts the car on the assembly line.
yeah,
That's your job now. You Does it matter? Does it really matter what are you really passionate? If you're a line worker, are you really passionate about making cars, or are you just passionate about having a good paying job? Chances are you're probably more passionate about having a good paying job. And you wouldn't be a line worker working on machines. You'd probably have a much more interesting job that you'll probably find more fulfilling to begin with. Um, do you One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because the main concern with AI for creatives, particularly visual artists,
hmm
isn't as much that it's going to take their job, although that is a concern. It's that it's stealing their work. And
yeah.
so when I heard this, right, this made me think of something. Do you remember the Music Genome Project? You remember
I'm
this
not
whole
sure if
thing?
I do.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and it's going to blow your mind because it's going to sound very familiar, right? So way back in 2000, I want to say it was 2007 or 2008, the Music Genome Project formed, and they started doing research on music. The reason I know this is because Tim Westergren, who I'll come back to in a minute, was tangentially, through multiple connections, a friend of mine.
hmm
So I was paying attention to this as it was happening. They cataloged hundreds of thousands of songs over the course of a few years, where they literally would take a CD, hand it to a researcher, and they had, I want to say they had a couple of hundred points of characterization for every song on a particular CD, and then the artist overall. And they did this over the course, so they ended up with a database of millions of songs that had been categorized down to the point where if you tell someone you like music that's in C minor, they can give you, out of a catalog of millions of songs, every song ever written in C minor. Like, it's an impressive project. Tim Westergren had a great idea with that. He's like, this would make a really good streaming radio service. And he created Pandora.
Mm,
And that's where Pandora's back, the backbone of Pandora is the Music Genome Project. And it doesn't actually know the song, but when you tell it, I like, song A, it says, okay, here is my 600 characteristics from song A. Let me build a model of what this person likes to listen to based on how those are factored in, their priority, their strength, 1 to 10. Let's say it's like, oh, strong female lead singer is an 8 on this song, so okay, let's put that first on the next song that we give him. So we're going to find him songs with strong female lead singers and then deprioritize based on the first song. And Pandora's hook was, the more you listen, the better it gets. And the
mm,
people that love Pandora love Pandora. You cannot get them to stop using it no matter what you come out with. Pandora is the epitome because their playlist has developed and been refined over the course of, 15 years now at this point,
hmm
and people love it deeply. But I remember when Pandora came out and there were musicians who were like, but that's just going to put people into a bubble, or they're stealing my work to figure out what people want to listen to. I remember hearing this. And it's really interesting because now we're hearing the same thing, but instead of hearing it about music, we're kind of hearing it about visual artists. And I wonder if you could speak to the misconception that AI is stealing work to do the work that it does. That people literally think that Midjourney pulls in a picture from Van Gogh and
hmm
goes, "I'm going to just give you another Van Gogh." I don't think they fully understand how it works. I was kind of hoping, as like the punctuation on our conversation, that you can help everyone understand how it actually works versus kind of the FUD that's out there surrounding the way it works.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if it is entirely a misconception that it's stealing,
Hmm.
because there are a lot of ethical concerns that have been brought up about like how
Hmm.
these models were trained. I
Right.
think even like Getty Images is suing. Uh, is it Stable Diffusion? I think
Could be.
over, yeah, over just training it on their library of stock images without permission, I suppose.
Adobe came up with for Firefly, which is their new AI. They're actually working on. They have a compensation model. So if they train Firefly with an image you submitted to Adobe Stock, they have
Hmm.
some kind of payment structure. They're going to give you a couple of portions of a penny for every time that the image is used in a request from a user, which I think is actually kind of a good start. I don't know if it's going to be where we end up, but I think it's a good start. It's better than anyone else is doing. So.
Yeah, and I actually watched. I'd recommend this. It's a keynote that was at a recent. It was the AI ML Media Advocacy Summit,
Hmm.
and this speaker Stephen Zapata really runs through a lot of kind of the history of generative AI, especially with visual
Hmm.
AI, and he talks about a lot of the lawsuits that have been brought up. And it's really a fascinating summit that I would, or a keynote that I would recommend anyone watch who's interested in this. I
Cool.
found it very very informative, but yeah, it's hard to know. I think there's like a class action lawsuit too in the U.S. brought against some generative AI tools. Like I think everyone's trying to figure out like if this AI is borrowing some of my material that I put out on the web to
But
create things. Like,
is it though? Like, is that what it's doing, or is it just characterizing? Because that's why I thought of the Music Genome Project, right? Because it's not
mhm,
really borrowing the song. It's not stealing the song. It's saying the song has this characteristic, right?
yeah,
So if I want to create something, I want to generate art in a style of a person, it's really just looking to say, what is the style of that person? What does that style look like? How many people have made, I forgot his name, the Eames chair. How many people
yeah,
have made knockoffs of the Eames chair over the years, right? They're not
sure,
they're not claiming it's an Eames chair. They're saying like this is what an Eames chair looks like. It has these characteristics. It's got this shape. It's got this kind of space between the headrest and the back. Like all this stuff. They're not actually saying this is an Eames chair. They're saying it's inspired by. Is AI is what, and maybe I'm wrong, right? But is what AI doing inspired by or copying?
that's the gray area, right? Like if it becomes less fraught with dead artists, but
Mhm.
living artists who might, if it could come down to a situation where someone's like choosing to create art in the style of someone that they want to hire instead of
Mhm.
hiring that person.
Mm.
That's certainly a possibility, and I could see that
Sure.
being very problematic. And when I think of being someone who's written for the past 25 years, I think about how much of my writing is online. I think
Right.
about the fact that I've used a lot of blogging tools and different things over the years,
Mhm.
and large language models have been trained on the internet. So some of the data, it's a small fraction, sure, but some of it's been trained on my contributions, and there are a lot of people that could say that. So do we deserve to get compensated, or is there some sort of model where like, hey, I played a part in training this thing. Like, does everyone get to use it for free? It's hard to know.
It's a big ethical question. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know that there even is an answer, by the way. That's
No,
that's
I'm
the hard
afraid there
part.
might not be, and I
Yeah.
think the answer is we're probably just going to have to figure it out as we go, which is
Yeah.
not ideal, but it's inherently human, I would say.
It almost had to happen, right? I mean, if you think about
Mhm.
the volume of data that's out there on the web. You had to think that somewhere. I mean, Google's been, what do they call it? They've been, what's the word? Damn it, what is the word? The word when everybody curating. Google's
Mm,
been kind of curating an index of the internet since its inception. That was the whole point, right? That
yeah,
Yahoo did it. Yahoo did it. Yet another hierarchical Oracle engine or whatever they called it, right? But it was designed specifically to categorize the internet.
yeah,
Google just did it better, and by doing it better, they scanned the page and said, "This information is on this page." They didn't really they're not you're not going to Google for the information. When that started happening, when they started doing those cards, the information cards on the side of the page or at the top of the page where they would put a paragraph from your site on Google, that's when people started getting pissed off, and that to me is like, that's a valid concern. Your content's on Google, and I don't have to go to your page to read it. But
Yeah.
how do you do
Yeah.
that? How do you track GPT doing that? I don't even know. Like, or
I
Midjourney,
don't
even
think you
harder.
can. I don't
Yeah.
think you can. And so that again, there's another problem to solve. Uh, but yeah, I think ooh, I had a point. Now I'm losing it.
Does it mean that artists are just not gonna we're not gonna have the rich free culture that we have now? Like, is that a that's a distinct possibility, right? All the artists are just gonna be like, I'm not giving my stuff away for free because when I give it away for free, it ends up training an AI that can take me away from my art. Like, does the free culture go away? It's a little scary.
Yeah, well, that whole notion's interesting too because when I think of like social media,
Hmm.
I was a small business owner. I guess I still am. I don't day to day manage the business, but Instagram was a powerful tool for
Sure.
promoting the work. It was my wife's a hairstylist, so we had a hair salon. So it was like a very valuable tool for getting clients, for sharing work, and it's free, right? Like I can just
Hmm.
sign up. I mean, there are paid things that you can do with Instagram, but
Of
you can
course.
use it for free to great effect. But it's this idea that the product's free, but it's not. I mean, you're paying in hidden ways.
Yeah.
You're training their algorithm, you're feeding them information, you're making them better at trying to sell you stuff.
Hmm.
And there's sort of like a similar thing happening, I think, where it feel like the internet, right? It felt free to a degree, but now we're seeing like, oh, all this information that I was just dumping on the internet, like it's being used.
Yeah.
Do I deserve to be compensated for some movie review I wrote 10 years ago? Probably not. But maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, right? That's the thing. It's I think I what I think is happening is I think along with the acceleration of the development of these AI technologies, all the questions that we kick down the road are starting to come to fruition where it's like, "Oh, we have to answer these now." Like, we have to figure out, is something free because it's out there for free? Or does the artist get compensated where possible if somebody's using it without their permission? Or what defines using it? Like, what do you we can't even figure that out yet. Like, that's a whole what defines using it? Is using it showing someone? Is using it saying, well, if it's Banksy, it's probably black and white with a little pop of color and it looks like spray paint art. Like, okay, cool. So does that mean if I ask the AI to generate something in the style of Banksy, am I now stealing from Banksy? Am I inspired by Banksy? Like, man, it's going to be an interesting couple of years because this is not going away. This is
Mm,
not going away. And I like the way you said earlier that it's going to be the difference is going to become the people that know how to use it and the people who have incorporated it or adapted to using it versus the people who ran from it and who are just going to get steamrolled. I think that's what's going to happen because it's going to catch you if you run from it. It is going to steamroll you. It's gonna win. Like,
yeah.
it's gonna
But
win.
I don't think that should mean like painters should stop painting and
No,
only
of
use
course not.
generative AI. But I think, God, I mean, the more optimistic outcome would be, like we kind of alluded to, like productivity becomes less of the crucible, and
Yeah,
you're able to make a comfortable living, um, being more creative and doing things where AI is enabling you to solve problems in new and unique ways, and then you also have more time to pursue the other creative things. And not everyone derives the same joy from being creative, but the people who do, speaking from experience, certainly you need it. Like
yeah,
you're for your mental health almost. You need
100%.
to be doing that creative stuff, and I think that's why it's touchy too, because it's always been such a struggle to make a living doing purely creative work. Like that's never been easy.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
yeah.
that's why college exists. I hate to say it, but that's the elementary to high school to college pipeline exists because they want people to be good factory workers. They want people to be good clerical workers. They want people to do this. I mean, they want people to kind of end up on a path. They don't want if you tell your guidance counselor in high school that you're going to be an artist and you're not the most exceptionally talented artist in the school, they are 100% going to steer you away from being an artist. Every
Mhm.
high school does it. There's not a high school in the United States. I challenge you to show me a high school where your child is not the most popular, most talented artist in the school, and they tell their guidance counselor they want to be an artist, and they don't say, "That's not realistic. You have to think of a real job, go to a real school to make real money." Like,
Yeah.
that's just, it's gonna be really, really, really interesting to see where everything ends up, especially as kids start coming up and, you know. Now
Well,
they're
that's yeah. I
writing
mean,
term papers.
yeah. I mean, there's a whole can of worms for academia with this, right? Like,
It's
not
wild.
only not only is it disrupted the way that students might generate work and the way that educators would evaluate the quality of it, but it's also there's that deeper question of like these jobs, these roles that we're training people for,
Yeah.
are they
That could
going
be
to exist?
yeah. My ex-wife is a teacher.
Mhm.
And, what I ended up finding out when all this AI stuff, and you kind of start paying attention to the educational system a little more when you're in that world for a while. And you started hearing teachers going, well, this is problematic. This AI stuff is problematic. And why is it problematic? Oh, because they can use it to write a term paper. But they always could. But what you
Mhm.
find out is that these teachers are using software. And the software has a catalog of all the available papers on the internet. So if you go to
Uh,
like a paper mill and get a paper, and you try to submit it as your own, these applications will flag it instantly. But now what's happening because of GPT and all these others is, well, it's a unique piece of writing. So now
mhm.
all these teachers that had 200 students and could just feed them all in just to find out if they can find out if they're stolen papers. Well, now you have to know your students,
Yeah.
because if a student hands in a piece of work that's well over their head and it's from Chat GPT, well, guess what? You're never going to know, because no software is going to flag that. No software is going to catch it. And if they edit it at all, it's really going to be hard for you to catch. So now you got to know your students a little bit. It's
Yeah.
really
Mm,
interesting. It might actually be good for the educational system. It's going to force
yeah, I mean,
teachers to
maybe
pay attention.
but yeah, and maybe we need to come up with different rubrics for evaluating comprehension and
Then
understanding of
papers. Stop
yeah,
having them
maybe
crank out papers.
yeah, maybe debates
Yeah.
in class debates will come back in fashion. I don't know.
I had a teacher in high school that did not give papers. He didn't believe in papers and was exactly that. It was like,
Mhm.
I'd rather you talk in front of the class. I'd rather see your participation level. I'd rather see, we had 3 debates a year with that guy. And you know what? You knew the stuff, because if you didn't and your friend did, you'd look like an ass and
Yeah.
very quickly. So yeah, it's going to just,
Yeah, and even if you use ChatGPT to generate some of your notes, I mean, you still
you have to
that
know
that
them.
that you have to learn it on some level. So,
Recall and processing all matters, right?
mhm,
Well, let's switch over. Let's lighten things up a little bit from from the fun and frolic of AI, because I love when I have someone who isn't a typical maker or creative, and I tell them about doing thing of the week. And
mhm,
everybody always gets really nervous, like, what is thing of the week? And I explain, for those of the people listening, obviously they know what it is, but thing of the week, I generally explain it to guests that have never been on, as kind of like show and tell. Like, you got something really cool that you want to show and tell. And when you told me what you brought with you today, I'm very excited to see what you brought today. So why don't we what's your thing of the week, Josh?
well, here, I'll show you. It's rather heavy. Give me a second.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've got my
Oh,
vintage Royal typewriter here.
oh, it's so cool. That is so cool.
Yeah, and
I
I like
love
this.
old typewriters.
Well, and especially what we've been talking about with like with the way technology impacts creativity.
Hmm.
Rob Wilson, my co-author on Age of Invisible Machines, we host a podcast called Invisible Machines, and we recorded an interview that we haven't released yet with Richard Saul Werman. Are you familiar with him?
That's a name I've definitely heard before. I've definitely heard that name. I'm not sure where I've heard that name, but
Well, he's quite a cat. Like he's in some circles he's known as the founder of TED.
oh,
Um,
okay.
but
Well,
but he also created a revolutionary city guide series. He's also come up with Latch, which is like a, a rubric for organizing information. He's kind of a someone who's done so many things that it's hard to pin him to one thing. But in the conversation we had, he made this point. He mentioned that I think he said that it had been pretty much determined that Shakespeare was probably just one person who wrote all of his works,
mhm,
but he wrote them with quill, I would assume. So he didn't. He had technology for writing, but it was a pen. If
mhm.
he had had a typewriter, if Shakespeare had been given a typewriter, which seems like basic technology to us now, um, how would that have affected his output? Like you can
Wow.
assume that he probably would have maybe written more plays, but would they have been higher quality plays? Was there something to be gained by sitting there and writing things out by hand?
That's
And
crazy.
that really resonated with me because the typewriter I showed you, my kind of my best friend in high school gave it to me as a gift because she knew that I wanted to write. And I think I was also drawn to this romantic notion of like pounding something out on a typewriter, kind of that silly like Hemingway macho mindset. That's
Or Chevy Chase on Funny Farm, whichever.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, but I mean, a typewriter is an amazing tool, a huge
Mhm.
upgrade over the pen and ink, but it is a lot of work. And as you sit there pounding on a typewriter, it's certainly a different experience than using a word processor because you're very deliberate with each word
Sure.
because you don't want to cover it with whiteout or you don't want to have to start over or mess up your page. So yeah, it's interesting to me. Sometimes I'll sit down and write a poem on it just to remember like what that experience feels like of like punching out a piece of writing one word at a time, which is certainly a far cry from where we're at now, where you can ask ChatGPT to to write a first draft for you, and then maybe you'll touch it up a bit. So yeah, I like to keep things like that around in my field of vision and in my life, just so I can try and hold on to the trajectory a bit and kind of respect the evolution of technology, and especially technology that has impacted creative people because I count myself among them.
It's interesting because two points very interesting about your thing of the week. Number one, I just talked about the suitcase typewriter that I used to use to write papers back in the olden days, and
Hmm.
I forgot what episode, but I'll have a picture of it because I actually went just after the episode. I went and I found a picture of it, and I had a picture of the exact same typewriter, and I believe it was also a Royal. It was their suitcase typewriter. It was from like the 70s, and it was like mint green or like mint bluish color, and I just remember everything about it. I remember the way it smelled. Like that's how visceral the experience of using it was. But as far as keeping around older technology, kind of as a reminder of where technology's gone, especially in the creative realm, I actually have my father's Minolta SRT 101 camera.
Oh
That
wow.
camera is borderline impossible to use. Like, I
Yeah.
I look at it, I don't know how my father ever figured out how to take a picture with it, and this is coming from someone who considers himself at least an amateur photographer, if not maybe an advanced prosumer photographer, who
Hmm.
has multiple SLR cameras, who loves photography. I can't figure out how to use his camera. Like, it just and I know he used to just look at it, and he knew what everything in the viewfinder did. He knew how to dial everything in, and it's just like, man, if I had to learn photography on that, would I be a better photographer or would I be a worse photographer? Like, would I have kept going if I had to learn all that? Or did the fact that I didn't have to learn all that get me to where I am today? Or did I not have the fundamentals to be where I am today because I didn't learn it on a camera like that? It's kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. And when you think about like word processing, I mean, I mentioned
Hmm.
that working on an article about should you or should you not use ChatGPT to write your resume, and we had this idea that I don't know if you remember, but there was a time when spell check first came out where it felt like I was hesitant to use it at first because it felt lazy. Like I should know how to spell this word. I'm not going to use spell check. Like, what if someone found out? I'm a writer. What if someone found out that I use spell check?
My spell check was the Franklin was the what was our the brown cover? Funkin' Wagnalls was the Funkin' Wagnalls dictionary that came with our encyclopedia. That was my spell check. There was no spell check. My first
Yeah.
word processor was Paperclip for the Commodore 64. Didn't have spell check. Like spell
No.
check was how good can you look up a word that you're not sure about? That's your spell checker.
Yeah, but then that relationship shifted fairly quickly from like
Yeah.
you're lazy for using it to you're lazy for not using it. Why would
You're
you not?
not only you're lazy, you're stupid. Like, why would
Yeah,
you not? Yeah, it's right in front of you. Just use it.
yeah, and I think that's again that's one of the that's sort of a core question that we're now asking ourselves about AI. Like, when is it appropriate to use it? How do I use it responsibly? Am I a fool for not using it, or
It's
am I a?
bonkers how this stuff always comes back on itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's always something. There's always something that's gonna the next thing, whatever it is, you can kind of there's like a cycle, right? First it comes
Yes.
out, everybody dismisses it as just modern technology that'll never stick around. Then as it starts to stick around, people are scared by it. Then when it establishes itself, people are like, this is dangerous and we need to control it and regulate it and tax it and whatever else they want to do. Then it just becomes kind of the way everybody functions.
Yeah,
like
then it becomes, "How did I
eventually.
ever live without it?" Like,
Yeah, like it goes it's like the pandemic, right? It goes from pandemic to endemic and you stop thinking about it. It's just part of your everyday life. Just another aspect of your life on the planet. That's yeah, man, I don't want to go back to paperclip. Oof, no way.
right?
My thing of the week, I'd love to say it's not a cop out, but it's just something that I've been paying so much more attention to. And before I go any further, well, I'll hit the disclaimer at the end. My thing of the week this week is Spotify. And I know that's the most not revolutionary, not interesting pick I've ever had for thing of the week. I fully admit it. I take responsibility, but Kathy and I were sitting there a couple of nights ago and we were talking about a song and I literally just added the song to a playlist that we had.
Mhm.
Like, it was just, like, instant like, I didn't even think about it. It's like in the old days, and I hate to say the old days, I'm not that old, I'm only 47, but you know what? Things have
Things are
changed a
moving
lot.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah, they really are. Because I remember in the old days, used to have to at best, I used to have to go 3 blocks away to Ciro's CDs in
Oh, yeah.
Brooklyn, and and it wasn't even CDs that I was buying because I didn't have a CD player, it was tapes. Like, if I wanted to hear a song, I had to go to Ciro's, hope he had the tape, and buy a tape. Like, I was
Mhm.
buying tapes. Now it's like, I wanna hear I'll give you a really good example. I had never, and this is a shortcoming in my life, I readily admit it, I had never really listened to Bob Dylan. And I told my friend who's a musician, I said, "Listen, I've never really listened to Bob Dylan. I need you to make me a playlist. Like, give me like the 10 to 15, if you're gonna start listening to Dylan, start here."
Yeah.
And he did. And then he just shared the playlist with me. And I was able to just start listening to any Dylan I wanted to listen to. And I've done that with a lot of bands where somebody will tell me about a band. I'm like, look, just give me a playlist in Spotify. You tell
Mhm.
me what I should listen to. I will listen to it. But now it's just like, it's not even a thing. We don't even think about it anymore. Like, you start dating someone, and one of the first thing you do is all the songs you share with each other, you start keeping them in one playlist. And it's a nice thing, right? Because that becomes the chronology of your relationship through music. You couldn't do that as easily years ago. I remember making mixtapes for girls. I
I was
already
gonna
died.
say that was my modus operandi, was crafting the perfect mixtape. Um,
Exactly.
and that's funny because I realized that I have kind of a fraught relationship with Spotify because, as I mentioned, my wife's a hairstylist, and so when I was working with her in the salon, sometimes there was a period
Mhm.
where I was doing a lot of work there. I liked to put on mixes that I would find on SoundCloud that,
Mhm.
I followed a few different people and stations that where people were actually like creating mixes. They were sitting down and playing records and doing it sequentially. It was one track. You couldn't skip through a song. You just had to sit and listen to it. And I think some of it was like art brute. Like I would put stuff on that all of a sudden I'd look around the room and see like six hairstylists glaring at me because the music was just so weird. But there was something to me about wanting to share. I guess this is germane to our conversation. Something human, like a human
Mhm.
made this.
Yeah.
And granted, there were a lot of Spotify mixes that people that worked at the salon made that were great, but so much of they would put Spotify on because they could just rely on an algorithm to play songs that, well, that weren't going to drive people crazy like some of the mixes I would play. But
Mhm.
yeah, that was sort of a contentious point. Like I was really adamant that I wanted like the human made mix. Someone took the
Yeah.
time to actually sit for 2 hours and listen to these songs and put them together this way. So we're going to
I
honor that.
I've developed an appreciation because I've watched her do her radio show. She does her radio show. I'll plug it because why the hell not? 8 p.m. every Wednesday. I've plugged it a few times, but I've watched her do her radio show and just watching her like make sure that every set, because she does 3 to 4 song breaks,
Hmm.
and every break is like perfectly like the songs go together. Like, she wouldn't put songs that didn't go together. They have some
Yeah.
kind of thread through them, and the amount of thought that she puts into it, and it's like that is that is the cool part of not just putting some big massive playlist on shuffle, is having someone say, I'm going to take you on a journey through these
Yeah.
songs and this is how they tie together, and then this group ties together this way, and then this group ties together this way, and you really develop an appreciation, especially as you watch someone really think about it, because she agonizes over it sometimes to the point where she like moves a set to the end of the show because she's still thinking about it while she's producing other sets for the beginning of the show. And it's
Hmm.
like I'm amazed by it. It's amazing to watch someone who's really invested in that. So when you said a playlist that somebody made and put it together, I totally can relate to that because I'm seeing it happen more and more, and it's wild to watch. It's just a wild thing to watch someone construct a playlist in real time. It's crazy stuff. So,
Yeah, and I don't think that desire will go away. I think people will certainly enjoy things that AI creates and find
mhm.
novel uses for them and
Sure.
for entertainment and productivity. But I don't think that well will run dry where people really want to interact with art that other humans created.
I'm
And
going
there's
to I'm going to a
yeah.
gallery opening tomorrow. Steve Casino, who is a guest on this podcast, has as we're recording this, just for people paying attention, it's March 31st. So April 1st at the Kraus Gallery in New York. So this will be up after that. Sorry, guys. But Steve Casino is having a gallery opening, and I get to hang out with him for a little while, but I also get to see his stuff up close in person. And it's like
Yeah.
you can't replace that with a picture. Like you'll never replace that with a picture. Like seeing art in person
No.
is powerful always.
When you could
So
argue too that like art isn't complete, like a painting's not truly finished until someone else looks at it and internalizes it and has their own
I
take on it,
love
their own
that.
reaction.
I
So
love
so
that.
I think of art that way too, that it's like it's a bonding experience between humans that brings humans closer together. And I not that AI can't facilitate some of that, certainly could, but I think we'll always need to have
Humanity.
those kind of human interactions on all sorts of levels.
For now, at least, the human connection is still a very important part of art. We don't
And
need to
it's it.
let that we don't need to let that go. We can keep that part. We
Yeah,
can
it's
we can
intact and we will preserve it.
that's the part that I think we need to be fighting for, not to not let things progress. We need
Hmm.
to just make sure that humans don't get snuffed out in the process. I think that's probably the right way to do it. Um,
Very important.
I'm going to take a second and thank the people that support the show financially, because without them, I could not do this podcast. And those people include Matthew Serio from Artigiano Serio, Big Al Schultz of New York Woodworks, Tori Decker from Tori Did It, Ed Swanson of Ed's Clocks and More, Jake Drews from Make with Jake, Meg and Chris from Onyx Designs Woodwork, Christian Neary of Warren Works, Jeff Stein, aka A Weird Guy, Kim and Garrett from Kim and Garrett Make It, Rory Langefeld of RLL Woodworks and DIY, Robert J. Keller, Rebecca Cole from Beck C Designs, Brian Arsenault, the Seven Hills Maker, Lars Coleman of Colorado Multicraft, Dave Bauer from Dave Bauer Art, Nick Birchtold of Birchtold Design Build, Jeremy Spees, Mike from Pixels to Prototype, Donald LeBlanc of Fun with Woodworking, Grant Alexander from the Clamp Podcast, Brad Harrison of Brad's Customs, and Billy Polton of Polton Projects. Thank you so much for your continued financial support. Most of you have been there since the beginning, and I am very, very grateful for it. If you can't support the show financially, I understand, but what you can do is leave a review, share the show, tell someone about it, promote it in your stories, let other people know that it exists, because it helps. Every little bit helps. And whatever you do to promote the show, I appreciate it, because then when you promote the show, I can get guests like Josh. Because Josh wouldn't come on just any podcast, mind you. Josh only comes on the best of the best. And when they're not booking him, he comes on here. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you,
it's been
Vincent.
it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm not gonna lie, I was very nervous. I was very nervous about talking to you today.
Oh,
Mainly because, it's outside of the norm of every time I step a little bit off the line of what people expect with this podcast, I get a little bit nervous. But I think that the kind of stuff that we talked about today is so not only germane today, but it's so important for where making creativity and artistry is going, that I think to not at least hear this stuff would be a big mistake. Like, even if nobody internalizes it, at least you heard a discussion about it where it's like, okay, it isn't all sun and roses, but it's pretty cool. And there's like some stuff you need to pay attention to, even if you're not going to involve yourself, be aware of it. And this is the stuff you need to be aware of. So I really thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I really do think that anyone who listens to this episode is going to walk away with a much better understanding both of AI and what's going on with the industry and where we have the potential to go if we just do it the right way.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. I hope that this information has been useful to the many creatives out there. And yeah, like I said, it's a scary time, but I think there's so much opportunity, and I really hope for a scenario where creative people could just be more creative and have more
Yeah.
time for that.
I think I think I think that's I love the idea of it just, of all of these technologies just kind of pulling away the distractions so that people can focus on what they love to do. I hope that's what comes of all this. I really do. Because if it does, then instead of worrying about how cold, sterile, and generic art's gonna be,
Hmm.
what you're gonna find is that the people that are making art can focus a lot more on it and the art's actually gonna get better. And it's
Yeah,
only the beginning. So
well,
if
it's
people
going to
want
require people working together, and we need more of that to solve all sorts of problems that we're facing right now. So
it does require working together. So all you guys like me who are solo in your shops and all you artists who pretty much go to your studio and tune out the world, stop tuning out the world. Stop. It's not good. You need to do the opposite right now. Humanity for life. Okay. Josh, where can people find you if they want to keep up with what you're up to, if they want to learn what you're up to, if they want to learn more about you, where can people find you on the big bad internet?
well, on the bad internet, I'm these days I'm really only active on LinkedIn, which is surprising to me in a way, but that's a good place to start. OneReach.ai has a nice LinkedIn presence. As I mentioned, my co-author Rob Wilson on our book Age of Invisible Machines. Wait, can I hold up a copy?
Sure,
There it
absolutely.
is. We host a weekly podcast called Invisible Machines, and we produce that in partnership with UX Magazine,
Cool.
which is one of the world's preeminent, maybe the first kind of big UX community publication. And so new episodes drop there every week. I also host kind of a silly podcast about the future with good information and lots of laughs. It's called 9000, spelled N9K. And I host
Okay.
that with my friend Mark Brush. We've been making podcasts together for years. So
Excellent.
those are the
Excellent.
easiest places to find me.
Sweet. We will obviously have the link for the book and your company, OneReach.ai, and all the other stuff that you mentioned in the show notes so people can find you. And I hope they'll follow along with what you're up to and throw a little support your way because I'm actually intrigued by your podcast now. So that's something I'm definitely going to check out. But thanks again
Cool.
for popping by. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for listening, watching, however you get the podcast. It's always appreciated. I'll be back again next week, just like always, and I hope you'll join me then. Till then, have a great week, everybody.